all of this conversation, though, Ariana, leads me to this for you specifically. I'm sure others will want to chime in on this. The Tea Party, the impact they've had. We've just now been talking about not one but two African-American congressmen who happen to both be Republicans, Mr. West out of Florida, Mr. Scott out of South Carolina. However you want to slice and dice this, Republicans now control the House, as we all know. Tell me why I should not believe that the strategy that President Obama is going to employ over the next 2 years is going to be Clintonian to the core, which means more triangulation, more pages stolen out of their playbook, which means more compromise and more capitulation. Disabuse me, please, please, of that notion.
Would you like to go to David to do that rather than to me?
To you.
I will not disabuse you of that, but before I will not disabuse you of that, I would just like to respond to this fascinating discussion, because that's when we need Dr. West, because basically what we are talking about is something very fundamental about human nature that we have seen in every period of history. When there is an economic crisis that fundamentally affects people's survival, the worst comes out in people. We've seen that again and again and again. And that's why I'm saying we need to go to the source rather than immediately assuming that these are the racist people. No, these are the anxious, the scared people. These are the people who think they're next. These are the people who are waiting for the next shoe to drop. And the entire country, with the exception of a few people really, are in that state. Because when you have 27 million people unemployed or underemployed, multiply that by 3 or 4, either in their immediate family or their extended family, who are affected or worried that they are going to be affected. And that creates a cauldron in the country that we are ignoring at our peril. And just look at history. You know, in the 1880s, we were actually expelling from the country Chinese workers, right?
Oh, yeah.
In the 1930s, we were expelling Hispanic people who are American citizens under Hoover. So this is not the first time that people become anti-immigrant. I have a foreign accent. I hear it. I do hear it. You know, people like to turn to you and say, hey lady, do you speak English? I don't say better than you, but I think, but my point is that xenophobia, whether it's anti-black, anti-Hispanic, anti-Jewish, is going to thrive when people are anxious, worried, out of work, and feeling bad about themselves.
But you see, but the other side of that, though, Sister Ariana, is this, that we've got a corporate media, we've got a mainstream media whose fundamental aim seems to be to make money, too. So they sensationalize these issues. They don't humanize them, so that there's a whole host of Americans out there of all colors who are trying to keep alive the legacy of Martin King, keep alive the legacy of Abraham Joshua Heschel, keep alive the legacy of Dorothy Day, anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic people who are thoroughly invisible in the media, other than Tavis' show and Amy Goodman and a few others. That's about it. So that what comes at people is such a little narrow, truncated discussion that bombards persons, reinforces the worst in them, doesn't accent the best in them, so we don't even have access to the best of our fellow citizens who are out there working so hard but still invisible. And what happens? Once we reach a moment of catastrophe will come. Right?
Well,
you either turn to those people, or you turn to the right-wing demagogues who are willing to manipulate the masses in order to sustain stability.
That is really the answer to Tavis's question. Because if the people who are suffering at the moment continue to be invisible in the next 2 years, that is really going to be the major legacy of the Obama administration. And when you bring Bill Daley as the chief of staff, that does not bode well.
I want to ask Dr. Follow-up. I want to ask Dr. Follow-up. Before I do, though, I just want to be clear that you did say to me that you could not disabuse me of my formulation earlier.
No, that's exactly the reason I could not disabuse you.
Because it's going to happen.
Is that at the moment there is the misconception at the White House that somehow the way for the president to get reelected, which is increasingly prevalent in terms of how the White House will be making its decisions, that the way to get reelected is to go to some kind of mythical middle. That, I think, is the great mistake of our politics. You know, I think that all these divisions, left-right divisions, are so obsolete that the Huffington Post, our reporters do not use these terms. It's lazy journalism. To say that wanting, for example, to have the right policies for Wall Street is not left-wing. You know, there are capitalists who believe this is not the way to run a country. To say that you want to leave Afghanistan, you have Joe Scarborough, you have Pat Buchanan, you have George Will, who are against our policy in Afghanistan. The media still call it left-wing because they are reflexively lazy about categorizing what's happening.
So we're back to the media. Back to the media again.
Well,
back to the media again.
Well, it makes David Brody's point about labeling. People get labeled certain ways. But I want to come back.
Labels are just categories that compromise our relation to chaos. So we have to have labels. You have to have labels. But labels must be objects of our critical sensibility. See what I'm saying? I want to follow all of us together. Yeah. See, so any label we use, we know is provisional and therefore never captures the complexity of reality.
I think labels are very important. I think labels are going to be there.
Yes.
The question is, are they well thought out in the genesis of the process?
Yes, I agree. And it shouldn't be used to beat people down. It should be a means for us to understand what they're going through and why they are opting the way that they're opting. Tea Party brothers and sisters are my brothers and sisters because I believe all human beings are brothers and sisters. But I'm suspicious of their politics and their policy. You see what I mean? And as a libertarian, I'll fight for their right to be wrong. I'll fight for their right to be wrong because I'm a libertarian on this issue. But we're still contesting.
Let me ask you a quick follow-up, Doc. You said something a couple minutes ago that I want to come back to, and I've heard you put it this way, just to get right to the point. I've heard you ask a few days ago, I think, this question: what can a blues nation learn from a blues people?
Yes.
That's a Westian question, a Westian query. What can a blues nation learn from a blues people? I raise that because I want to give you a chance to explain what you meant by that, and I'm asking it precisely because what you said a moment ago about what you intimated, at least, about what the country has to gain, has to learn from people of color, from those who are economically, politically, culturally disenfranchised, even in this moment, while we're trying to write this next chapter. Unpack for me what you meant by that question. What can a blues nation learn from a blues people?
If we had to begin with a definition of the blues.
Okay.
Ralph Waldo Ellison says the blues ain't nothing but an autobiographical chronicle of a personal catastrophe expressed lyrically. You see? So when B.B. King says nobody loves me but my mama, she might be jiving too, that's the blues. It's dealing with the catastrophic. Black people have been dealing with the catastrophe of slavery, social death. The catastrophe of Jim and Jane Crow, American terrorism, that was civic death. We were part of the body politic, but not having rights, access to public good. We've been dealing with the psychic catastrophe of being taught to hate ourselves. Less beautiful, less intelligent, less moral. The white supremacist lie told about us. We've been dealing with spiritual catastrophe, which is even in a country of liberty and opportunity, you are enslaved, you are Jim Crow, you are Jane Crow, you are Redline Bank, you are locked in the ghettos and hoods, and everybody else can come and move to the front of the Jim Crow bus, but you stay in the back. That's what we've been dealing with. But look what we produced in the face of slavery. Frederick Douglass. Do you want to enslave white brothers and sisters? No, we want freedom for everybody. Ida B. Wells Barnett. Do we want a Jim Crow white brothers and sisters? No. We want rights and liberties for everybody. Black people's struggle has been the leaven in the democratic loaf. We looked at the catastrophe and like the blues, we responded with a smile, not revenge but justice, not hatred but compassion. That's what Martin King's about. That's what Curtis Mayfield's about. You see what I mean? That's what John Coltrane is about. That's our tradition at our best. But what happened during the Reagan years was the Black freedom movement was confined to just another special interest group. Neoliberal and neoconservative intellectuals tried to reduce our movement to just our self-interest as if the black struggle was just for Negroes. That has never been the case. Never. We start with Negroes. We start with black people, and it relates to every citizen, poor, working class, gay, lesbian, and so forth, at our best. That's the legacy of Martin King. So what do we get now, especially in the media? Anytime you talk about the black agenda, they view it as just a special interest group. You see what I mean? It's like the corporate agenda. Is that just the corporations? Well, see, in a democracy, once those labels begin to ossify, and here I agree with Brother David, right on the edge, that once they ossify, then we can't even communicate. That's where we've been for the last 25 years.
Right.
We can't even communicate.
Right.
You see? So that Brother Rush Limbaugh would say, well, civility just wants to police me, so I can't express myself. No, Brother Rush, you can say what you want. We just want you to be truthful. Don't be cruel and vicious, and try not to lie. That's all. That's all. But things are so polarized. They're so polarized. And it's difficult for us to proceed. And in a democracy, if you don't have high-quality communication as it relates to public interest, you're going to end up with private interest reigning, and private interest has to do with might and power. Whoever has the power will define what's right. And no society can survive based on that kind of empty orientation.
Which raises this question then, and follow up to Maria Teresa Kumar.
But did I answer that question?
Yes, you did, brother.
No, I want to make sure I hit that.
You more than answered it. I thank you.
I want to be clear on that.
The American people thank you. Maria Teresa Kumar, though, I think it raises a fascinating follow-up for me. If Dr. West is right, and he's certainly passionate about it, and I think he is right, but if he is right, that in this moment where we're trying to move this country forward, trying to get past these divisions, everybody, including the president now, calling for stability, what is the country losing then by the voices of people of color being marginalized in the conversation? I wanted to make sure that we had, it's not about patting me on the back, but it's just one of my personal pet peeves as a black man on TV every night. I hate when I see too many conversations in this town that don't have Asians in the conversation, that don't have Hispanics in the conversation, that don't have African Americans in the conversation, and women in the conversation.
That's right.
That just burns me up. And so I do what I can in my small way to try to address that on the regular. But I think the country, to Doc's point, is missing something in this critical moment when the voices of women and people of color in the media are marginalized while we're wrestling with all this crisis. To that, you say what?
I mean, this is actually where I tip my hat to Ariana. Ariana Huffington Post is actually one of my most diverse online media platforms where you are representing the voices. So thank you for that. And I think what her works demonstrates is that we are basically, the online platform does democratize the rest of us, where we could have someone with different opinions and different voices in their garage writing and talking about it. But what we do need to do is we need to break open the mainstream media, and we need to have those conversations, because I think, Dana, you were talking about it, and also Dr. West, was that if I'm feeling uncomfortable about where I am today, and I don't have any rational conversation or any really understand of why I'm in the plight that I am, but I hear someone constantly telling me to hate or that it's their fault, it's easy for me to all of a sudden to conclude that I'm not at fault, but it's the changing faces of America that are. And so what we need to do is, with media, there is a responsibility to it. And we need to constantly talk to that responsibility and hold people accountable. I mean, Representative Gifford said it best. Words do have consequences.
Dana, you going to say?
I have some sympathy for what's being said here. Not long ago,
as a white male, we appreciate that.
Well, but I was on a TV show, and we were talking about Rick Sanchez being sacked after he said Jews control the media. Then I looked around and realized there were 4 Jews talking about it. I was one of them. So I understand where you're coming from. However, we all disagreed with the premise. But seriously, I don't understand what this mainstream media we're talking about is. Is that you, Tavis? Is that Ariana?
No.
Is it the Washington Post? Is it CBN? Is it CNBC? Is it? No. I think it's the From Forum.
We'll shoulder that burden.
But the point is, there really is no mainstream media. It's so entirely fragmented that there really is nobody or very few.
I want to give you a chance to respond. Let me just give you two answers because your question wasn't rhetorical. And if it was, I'm going to take it as a serious query anyway. Let me just give you two. Exhibit A, the Sunday morning talk shows. Exhibit A. Number one. Number two, I don't care which one you're talking about. CNN, no, Fox will be on this side. Fox, MSNBC, or CNN, all day, all night, all white. That's what you had.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
That was the first part of what that conversation was on one of those networks you mentioned. But but even so, I mean, look. Even if you take the Sunday morning audiences, I don't have the millions of viewers here in front of me. That's not as large as the number of people that Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh are reaching on the radio. It's not as large as NPR's Morning Edition, and it's certainly not as large as Google News or Yahoo. So I just think that the things we think of as the big media, yes, they're still big, but they're not anywhere near as monolithic or as important as they used to be.
But I think the larger point, though, is not even so much the size per se, as it is the process, and whether or not the country, our democracy, is missing something when these other voices are marginalized and left out of the process.
No, right. I think you should have 20 million viewers every day.
So do I. But that's
Well,
I think that's the obvious answer.
Luckily, things have changed.
Yeah, go ahead.
Things have changed. Today, there really has been an explosion of media, and people are looking at the mainstream media more critically every day. And the fact is there is an enormous responsibility on the media today to ensure that the media is giving us fact. But unfortunately, over the last couple of years, I think, things have gotten blurred. And it's not just fact, and it's not just news, but it's opinion. Right. But today, given what Ariana's doing, given the explosion of information on the internet and blogs, it's very difficult to get away with it because immediately on the internet, there is a correction, there is conversation, and there is the people. The people are speaking. I mean, for me, on CNBC, I like business news for that reason, because it can be measured and gauged, and there isn't as much room for opinion, because frankly, I don't want to turn on the news and hear someone's opinion. I don't care. I'll make my own opinion.
I think the problem is not opinion. I think is it opinion based on fact, or is it opinion based on fantasy? That's really the distinction for me all throughout the media. I don't have a problem with opinion. I don't have a problem with passion. I have a problem with people making stuff up. And I have such a big problem with it. We are launching a whole new fact-checking project on the Huffington Post, and we are starting with the State of the Union. Because our fact-checking project is going to be completely nonpartisan. We're going to be fact-checking Democrats and Republicans and everybody in between, because this is not a partisan issue. We need to just make sure that whatever our opinion, we recognize our reverence for facts. And we also recognize that the truth is not always to be found in the middle. Sometimes the truth is on one side or the other side. You know, the earth is not flat, period. Global warming is real. Whatever many scientists in the pay of Shell or Exxon may say, it is still real. But there is something that has happened to journalism, which is that has made us think that objectivity is to sit in the middle and present two opposing views, and like Pontius Pilate, wash your hands off the possibility of truth.
This seems to be a case. It seems to be a case where you are looking in, like an American tourist in London, exactly in the wrong way to find the oncoming bus. It's the other. You mentioned those cable channels. If you were to add up Fox plus CNN plus MSNBC plus CNBC plus the second network of CNN, you would get, on a typical night, an audience of 4.5, maybe 5 million people. Those Sunday morning shows you talk about, I think together, they're about 1.5 million people in a country of 300 million. That while you were concerned about how is the information the right to talk on television allocated for the best informed part of the country. It's for sure true that probably the 5 million, 8 million best informed Americans today are much better informed than their parents and grandparents were. But the 150 million worst informed Americans are much worse informed than they were a generation ago. A generation ago, if you wanted not to watch Walter Cronkite, you had to affirmatively do something about it. You had to get out of your chair and walk over to the black and white TV set and turn him off, and then clock it until the entertainment programs began half an hour later. Probably you were going to get a little bit. And if you wanted to know whether chicken was on special at Giant, you had to leaf your way past the news about what the mayor was doing and what your member of Congress was doing. We've constructed a media environment in which the problem is not media bias, the problem is not media concentration, the problem is that half the country is dropping out of informational media altogether. And this goes back to a theme I think we need to hit hard, and I'm going to say something that's maybe a little different from what other people think. We talk about the dysfunction in the politics, and that's true. And we talk about the dysfunction despite the improving quality of the people who participate in politics, which is a thing I would argue for. Why is it? Why are there 26 lobbyists for every member of Congress? Why are the lobbyists more powerful today than they were in 1965? Were people better in 65 than today? I don't think so. Were they less greedy in 1965 than they were today? We had different sets of structures and rules that made it, because the typical member of Congress was less powerful, it was just not worth hiring 26 lobbyists to lobby that member of Congress. There were committee chairmen. Power was more concentrated. And what we have done is we have pursued a series of fixes that make the problem worse at every turn. And that has been the story of campaign finance reform, because the driving ideas that we have about how to fix our politics are the wrong ideas. And because of the wrong ideas, each new round of reform makes the problems, in fact, worse. And let me throw out this last thought. It's a very common error to think that when you have a big problem, it must have a big solution. The solution must be as colossal. Sometimes the solution is as simple as changing the rules of procedure in the House of Representatives. Sometimes they are as simple as changing the relative balance of power of committee chairmen to backbenchers. Sometimes they're as simple as making sure that presidential appointees can go through the Senate as rapidly as they did in the 1960s, 70s, and early 1980s. I think that if we were not to lament our problems, but we're to begin by saying with each problem we're going to segment it, we're going to begin by saying what is the solution we're going to pursue, we'd find, as I said at the very beginning of this program, that the solutions are available, they are embedded in the problems, they are not beyond our capacity, our problems are not overwhelming, we can do this job.
I want to spend the last 45 minutes we have talking about this next year politically and the way forward, because again, as we said at the top, the campaign's about to be on in a matter of weeks as people start to declare that they're running next year. But let me start with you, David, because you've just said now something that I want to come back to. You talk about the solution is sometimes as simple as changing the rules. So the new speaker, John Boehner, talked the other day about transparency. Do you have any reason to believe that the Republicans now are going to change the rules in any way that's going to help solve the problem?
See, I'm against transparency. That's a perfect example of what I mean. That is an example we have this bias. President Obama has said that every visitor, they're going to publish all the logs of every visitor to the White House. And that's great. That's more transparency. Well, let me tell you, as somebody who worked in the White House, what that means. What that means is, if I have scheduled a meeting with somebody from Group A who has an opinion on topic 1, I now have to schedule a meeting with every one of his arch rivals. So I cannot have a meeting in the White House without having to book 13 more meetings, even if the only reason I'm giving that person the meeting is in order to sit there, watch my watch for 15 minutes while he yaks on, so that I can ignore him and get back to work. Now I have 13 more people I have to listen to while they yak on so I can get back to work. What the transparency does is it causes the system to choke and suffocate. The government moved faster and more effectively, and I think often more fairly, in the days when there were less transparency. We have this idea that the way we fix Washington is by giving the individual members of the houses more power as compared to the committee chairman. I think we've tried that, and we've proven we get bigger deficits, less accountability when we have a lot more empowered members. And those are not the way to think, but those ideas ought to be, those are not the way most people think, I know, but those are the things. If we're going to think creatively, we should not begin by assuming that more of the thing that has not been working is the thing that will work better in the future.
Well, hold on a second. Who is applauding here? Hold on a second. Do not applaud yet. Honestly, The idea that transparency has been tried and failed is so pathetic. I cannot really begin to answer it. I mean, do you think we have transparency? I mean, look at, where do I start? You want to start with Afghanistan? If you want to talk about transparency, you want to talk about the fact that we had the president promise the American people that we're going to get out in 2011. Then we had them say it was going to be in 2014. Now we're having them coming and telling us that, in fact, we don't know when we are coming out. And on top of it, but hold on a second, let me just finish.
You're complaining about the answer and
not
wrapping that in a complaint about the way the answer was reached.
No,
if all of that were done behind glass, in a glass room, you would not like the ultimate result.
It was done in a glass room. It was done in endless rooms. It was done in endless meetings at the White House. It was done in endless ways that the American people was kept out of until WikiLeaks came out. We did not know a lot of the stuff that the government was keeping secret from us. In fact, the same week, this is just one example. We could give you thousands of examples of that. The same week that the president went to Afghanistan in a surprise visit and told the American people that we are winning, which is an absolute and blatant lie, WikiLeaks came out with facts about the fact that we were losing, and losing money and losing precious lives and losing ultimately what is most important when it comes to war policy, our national security, because we are turning more and more people against us. That is significant, and the American people need more transparency if they are to know, as they should know, every time their elected officials are lying to us.
No, it's true. I mean, I think part of this has to do with part of this has to do with the difference between the democratic and the technocratic. If all you're after is the best deal you can reach, as opposed to disclosing what the process is, every government, every empire uses secrecy in order to hide and conceal decisions that they know don't speak to public interest.
We chronically cannot balance the budget. And that has been a problem dating back to really the middle 1970s. Why is that so? I'm about to suggest the reason why. Why were we able basically to balance the budget from the war until the middle 1970s and have chronically been unable to do so? And I think that, I'll give you one major reason, which is that when you empowering the 535 members of Congress is not the same thing as empowering the citizens of the country.
That's true. That's true. I agree with that.
That is the move that is always played here that is wrong. And that, in fact, when power is put in places where it is more visible, where people can understand it, that transparency creates secrecy. Because the way we create secrets in Washington is not by not refusing to tell people what is happening. We do it by we tell them in such overwhelming detail that only a few specialists have the patience to follow. This is not a city of secrets. It's a city of mysteries. And the reason
you got to break that down. I don't see that. The universe is mysterious, but it's it's the same thing as that mortgage contract that Elizabeth Warren was complaining about. Every detail of the contract is there to read if you can read it. And people would be, I think, with those mortgage contracts, they would be better off if they had better representatives, they had more empowered representatives, rather than if you say, here's the contract, read it for yourself. And one of the ways that the system becomes more unaccountable is by this diffusion of responsibility so that nobody seemed to have it. Nobody knows who to be angry at. And the result of it, by the way, and this goes to how's the president doing, and the assessment of that, is that the one person whose name people now know gets blamed for everything. Is the oil spill not capped? He gets blamed. Why? People know his name. They don't blame. You can't blame the people whose names you don't know. And if power is more and more diffused, not to all 300 million people, that's what shrinking government would do, but a big government with power diffused throughout the apparatus of government and little accountability and little name recognition, and a media system where 150 million people are probably not reading much anyway, and that is a formula for what we have now. No, but Dave, you do recall Dwight Eisenhower's speech on January 17th, 1961, where he talked about the military-industrial complex being so expansive that it's actually a form of theft. Why? Because it's aggressive, it reinforces a national security state, a permanent war economy. The Pentagon is untouchable. That's why even under Reagan, your own beloved Reagan, I know you're conservative, but under Reagan, The deficit triples. It's military Keynesianism because he couldn't get a hold of the Pentagon's budget and the military budget expanding.
The Pentagon budget did shrink in the last 3 years of the Reagan. I mean, after it peaks in '86 and comes down as a share of the national.
Then why was the deficit triple?
The deficit.
Military Keynesianism, right?
Because that's when we've lost control of the healthcare budget. Health in the 1980s is when healthcare spending begins its course of expanding at double. Sorry, look it up.
No, but military.
This is what I mean about the mysteries. Not the Medicare budget is not a secret. It's printed. You can look it up.
Are you denying the role of the Pentagon in the defense budget between 1973 and 1988?
I'm not denying it. I'm saying if defense spending were the driver, we would have moved from 1986. We would have moved to greater and greater balance between 1986 and 2001. And we, by and large, did not do that. And I'm going to predict to you now that we are going to find, as the defense budget begins to shrink after 2013, as I expect it probably will, we are going to find that our difficulties in balancing the budget remain as chronic as ever. We have a difficulty in bringing means and ends into harmony, and it is not because we spend too much to defend ourselves.
Let me jump in. This is an important conversation. It may be arcane for some, but it's an important conversation. Let me come back to something you said a moment ago, though, David, that is something that we can all wrestle with, and I wanted to segue from you to David Brody first, which is, again, the notion of the politics. What's going to happen to our politics over the next couple years, as, again, we talk about trying to write this next chapter. As I said earlier, we're at the halfway point of President Obama's first term, and we've done some assessing of that, and we'll do a bit more in the few minutes that we have left here. But we're just, as I said also earlier, David Brody, just weeks away, literally. We're just weeks, couple months away from a whole bunch of folks starting to line up and publicly declaring that they are running for the White House. Most all of them are going to be Republicans. So what's about to happen over the next couple of months?
Wow. You're going to see in the next, probably starting in March at some point, I think you'll start seeing some of these candidates get in, like a Newt Gingrich. You'll see Tim Pawlenty get in. You'll see Mitt Romney get in. Sarah Palin's an open question. Mike Huckabee is a semi-open question, but I think he'll probably get in. And I think what you're going to see as it relates to the Republican field, if that's where you're going with it, I think there's an evangelical primary, and I think there's a businessman primary. I really do. I mean, I think, in other words, you've got people like Huckabee, Palin, potentially, Thune, and Mike Pence, and some other folks that will compete for the evangelical vote, and then you'll have the businessman primary, if you will, where you have Romney, possibly Haley Barbour, Mitch Daniels, a Tim Pawlenty, and Newt Gingrich, some folks along those lines. So, I mean, I think that's what you're going to see. And look, the Republicans know that the president is vulnerable, obviously. And I think as it relates to kind of where the president may have misstepped here, most folks will agree, I would think, that this is a center-right nation. I mean, I don't know too many people that would necessarily disagree with that, but you have a center-right nation, and you had a president who went ahead and passed partisan legislation as it relates to health care. He just got whether he was trying to get an Olympia Snowe or a Susan Collins. And so my point simply is that he was trying to shoehorn something, and I think it woke up people. Getting back to the Tea Party for a moment, it woke up these Tea Party folks who were sitting on their couch, watching Oprah, and going to get a Hot Pocket. All right, they were watching All My Children. But the point, they were watching a plethora of
I'm glad you changed that, because Oprah was about to tweet you in about 30 seconds. They were not watching me.
Hey, I'll take that publicity.
David Brody! You're wrong, David Brody! You're wrong, David Brody!
I just want a free gift from her show.
David, you're also wrong about one other thing, which is the idea of a center-right country. It's that's what I mean about these cliches that are endlessly repeated, and the conventional wisdom kind of congeals, and people begin to believe it. Please do not believe this idea. This country has been on a journey towards a more perfect union from the beginning that famous Constitution was written. So if you go back to that, are you saying that every bit of progress we made, you know, the Emancipation Proclamation, the 19th Amendment, the Civil Rights Act, are you saying that all these were left-wing initiatives in a center-right nation?
Right, no, of course not. Of course
no,
not.
right?
Right?
What were they? They were basically
But
the country becoming more inclusive and coming more and more together. Why is that left-wing? I mean, if you say this is left-wing, then you are giving every progress that happened in America to the left. Do you really want to do that?
No, good point. I mean, I think the polling bears some of this out, but that's a whole other discussion. The polling is out there, and I think...
Let me ask you this, though, to your other point. What impact, then, since you've talked about the Tea Party tonight,
yeah.
And we saw the impact or lack thereof, depending on one's perspective, in the midterm elections.
Right.
What do you predict the impact of the Tea Party will be in the big deal, the presidential election?
Yeah. Well, first of all, they're going to, as it relates real quick to the House of Representatives, they're going to make John Boehner's life a real problem up there. I mean, you know, you've got 43 or so House Republicans that are Tea Partiers that are going to push Boehner.
Is that your way of saying that the Republican Party made a deal with the devil in the Tea Party?
No. I'm just simply saying that there is a faction up on the Hill that is going to push Boehner and McConnell, if you want to say to the right. I don't want to use that label, but my point is that they're going to do that.
Well, I ask, I'm not being flip here. I ask whether or not the Republican Party made a deal with the devil in the Tea Party, because you're making the point now that it's the Tea Party is on the Hill now who are going to drive these guys crazy, McConnell and Boehner, and push them where they don't want to go. But they wanted these Tea Partiers to get elected to take over the House back in November.
Here's the thing. You're right. Good point. Here's the thing. They break bread, if you will, with the Tea Partiers on the overall philosophy. They all have Boehner and the Tea Party, and Boehner attended hundreds of Tea Party events. So, I mean, the philosophy is not the issue. So to do any sort of deal with the Tea Party, I mean, it was there for the taking because they lined up pretty well. The difference is ideological purity. The Tea Party wants ideological purity in the sense of constitutional roots and going back to, you know, this first principles. And Boehner and McConnell are up there to either cut a deal or to, you know, work on getting legislation passed. And there's a much different reality for these Tea Partiers.
What David is describing, though, is for those of us who would like to elect a Republican president, kind of a nightmare scenario, because we have a party that is whipsawed in ways that the things. I mean, this is always true. There's always a tension between what you have to do to get your party's nomination in either party and what you have to do to win the election. But it is going to be an especially painful whipsaw this time. I mean, we have now videotape of Mike Huckabee giving a speech in 2007 in which he talks about the problem of global warming and how he's in favor of this and that solution in order to deal with this problem. Because Mike Huckabee is a very intelligent and well-informed person. And now that this is going to be used to torment and torture him. And I don't know, I think he's going to discover that this is a very difficult thing for him to get past. We have in Mitt Romney a very effective executive, somebody who would make, I think, a fine center-right president. But he's got on his record, he supported TARP, and he's the author of the health care program in Massachusetts that looks, to the unbiased eye, an awful lot like the program the president just enacted, that, as we know, is leading us to Nazism and death panels.
That's right.
And so he's like Mr. Death Panel now. And one by one, and people are going to find it. I mean, we saw what just happened in the past 24 hours with Tim Pawlenty. Tim Pawlenty, who just governor of Minnesota, excellent executive, very responsible, very sober-minded person. Nobody's idea of a bomb throw or anything like that is now proposing that he is now saying it is going to be a priority of his to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which just passed the Senate with more than 70 votes.
But David Frum is making a point that I've made repeatedly about the position of President Obama, which I want to get Cornel West and Ariana to respond to, specifically given their politics, and maybe even Dane if he wants to. I'm going to come back to you in a second, I promise. But you're making my case. I've said consistently that if I'm Barack Obama, if I'm President Obama, I'm thinking to your analysis right now, and you're giving the analysis better than the Democrats can, and you're a Republican, you're a conservative.
I worry more about it.
All right, okay. So if I'm Barack Obama, I'm thinking to myself, you can't beat somebody with nobody. You can't beat somebody with no. Y'all got to put somebody.
Well, we are going to nominate somebody. Right, exactly. So I want to put that on the record.
Yeah, but that somebody had better be somebody. That somebody had better be somebody, the right somebody, because you can't beat against somebody with nobody. If I'm him, I'm thinking, who they're going to put up here, number one. And you're given the list of all their weaknesses in the first place. But the second thing is, specifically to Dr. West and to Ariana, if I'm Barack Obama, I'm also saying to myself, for all of y'all's protestations, y'all's, Tavis's, anybody else, y'all ain't got nowhere to go. What you going to do? You ain't got nowhere to go. What you going to do, Doc?
Bear witness, brother. That's all you can do in your life, tell the truth and fight for justice.
And hold your nose and still vote for it.
Well,
The ballot secret.
it depends, because we got 2 years now. So the thing is this, that it's very clear that the two-party system is part of the brokenness that we're talking about.
Right.
We got both parties that are dominated by the same interest, corporate big bank. You got ordinary citizens, different political, ideological, racial groups feeling relatively powerless, relatively impotent. Now that can be the makings of a crypto-fascism if we don't begin to come to terms with this, you see. But on the other hand, it also means the Tea Party, brothers and sisters, they're going to become more and more upset with the establishment in the Republican Party because the business interests and their populist interests begin to be more and more in tension. And at the same time, Barack Obama, masterful, eloquent, charismatic in his language, in his policies. You can't bring in Geithner and Summers and say you're building on the legacy of Martin King. You can't do that. Martin died for sanitation workers. He died because he sided with poor babies in Vietnam against American occupation. He was anti-militarist, he was anti-imperialist, he was against the American empire in terms of its presence around the world, undercutting what he thought to be certain principles. But all Martin could do was bear witness. That's why when he died, 75% of Americans against him, 55% of black people against him. Because he was too loving. When you love poor people that much, when you love working people that much, that makes you the freest man in the country, or the freest woman in the country. But you also are the biggest threat to both Republican and Democratic parties. Now what I'm calling for is the legacy of Martin. But I can only call for it, I can only live a life based on it because I don't control history, I don't control the system. The whole system has a rock that shot through it in a certain way. That's not beating America down in that way. It's his Socratic criticism. No, I want my brother to understand that we still,
Dr. West,
we still working on this thing together. It's just,
the president does have a bust of Dr. King in the Oval Office.
He's got Brother Martin, but what is Martin saying every day he walks in? How deep is your love for poor and working people? I died fighting an illegal, immoral war in Vietnam. What makes you think the war in Afghanistan doesn't have the same status? That's what Martin's saying to him every day. But the problem is this, though, that this is part of the lies of the mainstream. People have reached a conclusion Barack Obama is the fulfillment of King's dream. That's not true. That's not true. Our beloved president is a fulfillment of King's dream. He's not the fulfillment of King's dream. The fulfillment is poor people, not just black people, white, red, not just in this country, but around the world. That's a hell of a dream. Martin was that kind of dreamer. We got to be honest about it.
But Ariana, the question still remains, what you gonna do?
The question is, if you go back, as I did recently, to a book that David Plouffe wrote, the president's campaign manager, who's just gone back to the White House, about the campaign, which was an amazing campaign. It was a campaign of audacity. And in that book, you see that again and again, they talk about the middle class. You know, that was the North Star of the campaign, is how David Plouffe called it. Again and again, they talked about the people being hosed. I'm using language from the campaign speeches. There is a very, very clear foundation to that campaign. So I brought here two quotes, because it's one that the president gave yesterday. He said that our task, working together, is to constantly widen the circle of our concern so that we bequeath the American dream to future generations. Now that's what Cornell is talking about. I don't think that's left. I don't think that's right. That's what America has always been about, expanding the circle of our concern to include more and more people who need our concern. This has to be a shared national agenda, or we are screwed.
That's true.
That's
That wasn't the president.
And the second quote is from FDR, and it's really saying the same thing in different words. He's saying the test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much, it is whether we provide enough for those who have too little. Now, FDR, when Newt Gingrich gave his first speech when he took the gavel as speaker in 1994, he said that FDR was the greatest American president. Is that right or left? That's what I'm saying. We need to stop this stupid conversation. We need to, I was in Brazil recently. I was in Brazil and I was in Chile. I interviewed the conservative president of Chile. And he said to me during the interview, my greatest priority is eliminating poverty in Chile. And I thought to myself, Jesus, you hardly hear anybody here in the Democratic Party talking about poverty.
That's right.
And you have the conservative president of Chile. You go to Brazil, Maria, you know that. And you have Democrats and Republicans, or whatever the names are there. You have the conservative who was defeated by Lula's successor, whose policies towards the poor were even more progressive. Why? Because they realize you cannot have a successful, thriving country if you don't move people from poverty into the middle class.
I think if you notice, Tavis, both Cornell and Ariana danced around your question, and I think that is because they don't have a good answer to it, because there's nothing they can do about it.
Exactly. That's my point.
They're stuck.
They stuck right where they are.
They're stuck with this president. They're going to support him. There's not going to be any serious challenge to this president from the left.
Not the left.
From wherever Ariana is, from the Upper East Side. And at the same time, you see the potential for some real fratricide in the Republican Party. I think it's fair to say that this president reached his low point on November 3rd, and the Republicans reached their high point then.
Let's hope so.
Well, you may hope so. I mean, I'm just looking at it, looking at the facts here, and you can see the economy is beginning to hum. We're looking at a 2012 election with a 2010 mindset. Once they've added, millions of jobs and people are feeling better, it becomes a very different equation here. So you're going to have a more satisfied electorate, a less angry electorate.
You think that's likely to happen?
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, we never know what event can occur.
You think it's likely to happen?
Yes, I think more likely than not on the path, the trajectory we're on, the president has a fairly easy.
Where are these jobs coming from? Where are these jobs coming from, Dana?
Last month we added 100,000 jobs.
Yeah, where are these jobs coming from?
A lot less than people who entered the labor market.
There's a massive amount of foreclosures in the pipeline, and a massive amount of shadow inventory in the pipeline in terms of housing. I think it's going to be a very tough nut to crack.
If the economy doesn't grow, then all bets are off. But I mean, look, I'm basing this on what the people who study this say. I mean, if the economy is growing, the jobs are added.
But if my uncle had cojones, she would be my aunt. The economy is not improving in a way that's going to affect working people in the middle class. There's absolutely no evidence of that. But you know what? Larry Summers had convinced the president. The reason the White House focused on health care is because Larry Summers had convinced the president that the economy had turned around. Larry Summers had convinced the president that when it came to 2010 and the midterm election, the unemployment was going to be down to 8%. He was going on all the Sunday shows. I remember being with him on Stephanopoulos' show, and he said, there will be growth in the spring, like Chauncey Gardner. Well, there was no growth in the spring.
And now he's back at Harvard.
Right, and that's
Dana points out he's giving a keynote at the Global Hedge Fund
in Bermuda.
In Bermuda, not the Homeowners Association, but the hedge fund.
But this, all of this conversation now, though, takes us back to the issue I raised earlier, which I want to come back to again, because we didn't get into it earlier, and I want to press this once more. For those who supported President Barack Obama when he ran, who bought into this hope and change, who believed that things were going to get better and that there was another way. Why should we believe that anything from here to 2012 is going to get better if, one, he knows y'all ain't got nowhere to go, on the one hand, Dana, and on the other hand, this divided government means again that there's going to be more compromise, more capitulation, anything to get points up on the board. So so public policy wise, you ain't going to get what you thought you were going to get. He knows you ain't got nowhere to go anyway. He's the lesser of two evils in a worst case scenario. So what you going to get for the next 2 years?
Tavis, I'm very tempted to make mischief here, and to say, you're absolutely right. Go vote against him. You're right. He's going to let you down. He's going to betray you. Vote for Mitt Romney. Then you know what you get.
No, that's not the option. That's not the alternative. You got other options.
But I would say, putting on a historian's hat with a long view, I don't like to confess this, but I was there for conversations like this in 1982 about Ronald Reagan. And what conservatives felt about Ronald Reagan in 1982, some of them put it in writing when they then have a lot of embarrassment about it. But he's a sellout. He's not delivering on any of our things. He had just presided over this big tax increase in the summer of 1982. That's not, your presidents are compromisers, and that's what the political system does. And you take what you can get and you choose between what you like a little bit more and what you like a little bit worse. And this goes back to my point about before about how we judge these things by the wrong metrics. I think we have a huge crisis in this country of followership. People need to understand the constraints under which the people who do this work of coalition building and assembling do their work. And the forces that are going to make John Boehner's life a misery are, I think, very unrealistic about what he can achieve. If John Boehner, from a Republican point of view, if John Boehner is able to bend the curve on government spending, prevent tax increases, make sure that the new regulations are not imposed. If he can do those things and play a defensive game, those are huge triumphs. But yet, if he does what by any reasonable definition is a huge triumph, a lot of people who invested hope in him will regard him as a total sellout.
I'm sorry, Tavis, I was just going to say real quick, I think Ariana makes a great point, and she made it earlier about independence, back to labels. That we get too caught up in Barack Obama has to win independence to win the presidency. Okay, well, technically, if you look at polling numbers, you can try to make that case statistically. But what this is about is winning the message, whatever that message is. In other words, if he believes that his policies aren't leftist or center or right, whatever it happens to be on the right, with Republicans, whatever he believes his policies are, he has to convince the American people that they're not liberal, that they make sense, and that this is a conversation of ideas in this country, and that's what the Republican is going to have to do to win the White House. So, for example, that Republican, whether it be Mitt Romney or Huckabee or Pawlenty or whoever, they're going to have to get down and dirty, if you will, and explain why free market principles, in their view, are the right way for America. But you can't just go on your talking points for, on page 1. You got to go deep in the playbook. You got to go pages 2 through 12 and get in the communities and explain it. Because if you don't explain it, then you're going to be in deep trouble.
Maria?
And I think we have to take, and this is where we need to take a playbook from the Tea Party. We make the Tea Party as this huge movement. They're a sliver of the Republican Party, but they're the squeaky wheel. And they've done an excellent job of actually making sure that they took back Congress. And it's not on what is Barack Obama going to do for us, but what, as a collective, the majority, going to do for ourselves to hold Barack Obama accountable and also create a space to make sure that our representatives are being held accountable. I, for one, am not ready to pick up my marbles and go home. There's too much at stake, and there's too much at stake for the future of America, and it's our accountability of us to make sure that we're putting pressure on our government to ensure that.
So over the next, it's a powerful point. It's a powerful point. I wrote a book, about accountability. So I'm with you on that. The question is, how between now and then do these people that you're talking about, how do we hold the president accountable and help push him into his greatness? How do you do that from now to this next election? And I ask that because specifically, when we discussed this earlier, specifically in the black community. Let me just give you a quick example, and these numbers are they're out there. Everybody in this room knows that the most loyal constituency in the president's base are black voters. Everybody knows it. The most loyal constituency in his base are black voters. The enthusiasm, the excitement, the euphoria about Barack Obama 2 years ago, made Negroes go vote who had never voted before in their lives to make sure that we elected Barack Obama. Barack Obama did every black radio show. He was on people's radio shows I'd never heard of who had radio shows. He was talking to bloggers I'd never heard of, begging black folk in this country to turn out to vote for him in the midterm elections. And what happened? 1 in 4 black people turned out in the midterm elections. So all the excitement of 2 years ago disappeared, even amongst his base, when it came to turning out for the midterm elections, even though he begged them to do that to help him keep moving forward this agenda that he had sold to them. This is what I mean about holding him accountable. The excitement and the symbolism ain't gonna do it. You need some substance. You gotta hold him accountable. But how do you do that over the next 2 years?
I mean, a part of it has to do with Brother Davis.
See, I don't think this is going to be worked out in Washington. I think we have too little faith. I think we have too little faith in what people are doing all around the country. And I think it's so important to talk about that, because as I traveled around the country writing my book and then promoting my book, I was stunned again and again by the millions of people who may have given up on politics, but they have not given up on their communities and on each other. And they're using social media to come together. I mean, one of the most fascinating examples is an unemployed concierge in Portland, Oregon, who could not get another job. So he started a site called we'vegottimetohelp.org. And he brought together other unemployed people helping people of need. You have unemployed lawyers, unemployed accountants who are helping each other. You have people who are starting their little businesses on Etsy.com. Have you been there? They're taking their passions and their hobbies and they are turning them into a way to make a living. You have Swap.com, where people are swapping things that they have and that they need. So there is an explosion happening around the country, but we're not talking about it, we're not chronicling it. So I think what we need to do is to bear witness not just to what's happening in Washington, but also to what's happening around the country. We need to tell stories that will actually bring these people to prominence in a way that can encourage others to get involved. And for me, that's really the battle. I mean, all these forces have been unleashed in this country, forces of fear, forces of tremendous economic anxiety. Either they are going to be directed towards demonizing and turning on each other, or they're going to be directed towards helping and building and basically tapping into our better angels, and that's for me the battle.
I mean, for me, that is a crucial point. Once we perceive the limits of electoral politics, given the brokenness of our system, people either disengage completely and just follow the weapons of mass distraction, television, video, internet activity. They just check out. They just live in a world of make-believe like the American Hamlet, Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire by the white literary bluesman Tennessee Williams. Or you organize poor working people, those who love them and want their situation to be better, and put pressure to bear on those in the electoral political system. But if that system is so broken that even that organization doesn't have impact, then we're in a world of trouble. But let me put it this way. It reminds me of Henry Highland Garnett, the first time black people ever organized in America in the 1830s. The first thing he said when he looked at all the black folk, he said, I want you all to never confuse the situation of slaves in America with those of the Israelites in the Hebrew scripture. For us, Pharaoh was on both sides of the bloody Red Seas. Now see, that's the blues. That is the blues.
Yeah.
You see, because what they said was, don't think that just because you be emancipated from slavery, Jim Crow won't come get you. Don't think because you elected a black president that after his 8 years, you still don't have more black poor people in the prison industrial complex. You don't have more black people poor. Then what happens? Well, you see, I'm not concerned just with black people, but I start there. Well, I love black people first, and I got spillover love for other brothers and sisters. Now, what that means is, how do any of us in a democracy deal with their desperation, deal with their hopelessness once they make that perception? Now that's a serious question, because that's how you lose your democracy. We almost lost it in the 1860s with the Civil War. We almost lost it in the 1960s. That's a serious question.
If you go back to March 1965 and the famous meeting that Dr. King had in the White House with Lyndon Johnson, when Lyndon Johnson told him that he doesn't have the votes for the Voting Rights Act. You know, again and again, power says we don't have the votes, right? That's the classic response. And he basically went out and came the Selma March, and a few months later we had the Voting Rights Act. So it's really, as Maria Teresa said, you know, it's really looking and finding the leader in the mirror instead of constantly looking for the leaders in Washington, because they're not there.
Well, and Tavis, yeah, I just want to say, I mean, to invoke John McCain for a moment on this stage with the Straight Talk Express. Here's some straight talk.
That was a long
time ago. Long time ago. I mean, the straight talk here is the president hasn't invested the political capital. I mean, you can't just have an event, a press conference, whatever. I mean, what did we have in his first term? We had the beer summit, right? I mean, that was pretty much the media highlight in the first 2 years. And you know, it didn't address anything as it relates to substance within the African-American community and some of the problems that you've been talking about. So, I mean, look, I mean, unless the president is going to invest political capital, and I got to tell you, what happened to the Responsible Fatherhood Initiative? I mean, that was something that could have brought evangelicals from a moderate and conservative standpoint and the African-American community together on something like that. But that was, I don't want to say dropped, it was in the faith-based office, but it was pushed to the side.
I want to go to Dana and ask the answer. Let me just say right quick, though, and God knows I do not speak, I have not been empowered to speak for all black folk in this country. But when you say that the highlight for black folk was the beer summit, I know black folk resoundingly disagree with you on that.
I'm talking about from a media perspective.
But I think public policy-wise, you know, for all the shortcomings of it, black folks celebrate the health care passage like many other Americans do. They celebrate don't ask, don't tell, and fairness like many other Americans do. So I know you meant from a media perspective, but I just wanted to clarify that I don't think that for black folk, they think the highlight of his first 2 years was a beer summit.
Right, real quick, but the media portrayed, no, but here's the point. The media portrayed that as an African-American issue. In other words, they put it in a tiny little box.
That's true. Right.
And that's what I was saying.
That part is true.
That's what I'm saying. Healthcare wasn't termed an African-American issue in the media, you know, and a lot of these other
So, Dana, here's the question then. We got just a few minutes here left to go. Tell me why I asked Ariana to disabuse me of something earlier. She could not. Maybe you'll be more successful here. Tell me why, given all that's happened since President Obama was elected, and we could do this all night, Tea Party, people showing up at rallies with guns, the racist attacks against the president, losing the House in November, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Tell me why I should not believe, while we sit here tonight with all the talk in this country about civility, that this is not going to be the ugliest, nastiest campaign for the White House in the history of this country. Can you disabuse me of that?
Well, I'd like to. But I wouldn't be able to do it with any confidence. I mean, this week, things look much nicer in this town. In fact, we just got an announcement this evening before we came out that Democrats and Republicans are going to sit together during the State of the Union address. Isn't that terrific?
How nice.
Are they going to hold hands?
Hopefully they will hold hands. You know, because usually one side's up and then the other side pops up. Now they'll just be interspersed.
Sing Kumbaya and all
exactly. Look, I mean, at this moment, this is a smaller version of what happened after September 11th. It feels like things might be different. Just from experience, I find it hard to believe that will occur. I did a column recently on Paul Ryan, who's in charge of the budget for the House Republicans, and we were talking, you know, we're going to cut a deal and work things out here. He said he wanted to take it and litigate it in the next election. So I think we've reached a point, you know, Ariana's talking about, you know, going back to the grassroots. I think everybody's basically given up on the hope that they can stop each other from doing anything. Not much they can do, but they can't actually achieve anything affirmative. So they've essentially given up and are ready to throw themselves into a bitter, nasty campaign.
I want to play this tape back in about a year, David, so I want to ask you the same question. Tell me why I should not believe that for all the talk about civility, for all the talk as we sit here tonight, Republicans and Democrats again saying, this is not about Republican or Democrat, we're all Americans, and everybody now agrees that civility is the order of the day. Tell me why I should not believe this is not going to be the ugliest, nastiest, maybe even most racist campaign for the White House ever.
Because unlike what happened in November 2010, when about 36–37% of the population voted, you're going to have 55, 56, maybe 57% of the population voting. And when you have a bigger electorate, you have a less partisan electorate. And one of the, that I think actually that I was struck by the 2008 was not an especially rancorous, and it was not a personal election. And there are people, there are individuals, there are a lot of people who participate. Not everything is controlled by the campaign organizations. But in fact, there was a lot of restraint shown. Barack Obama could have said a lot more things about McCain's age. McCain could have sent dog whistle signals about Barack Obama's race. Both of those things tended not to happen. And they tended not to happen partly because of the character of the people involved. I think John McCain is a man of very high character, but they also happened because pragmatic strategists working for both parties said it won't work. One of the things we know about negative advertising is that it tends to suppress turnout. And especially on the Democratic side, where you have less, you have younger voters and more minorities, people where you have more turnout problems, negative campaigning is going to be counterindicated for you. And on the Republican side, it is that anything that actually has any whiff or any even attributable whiff, even if it's actually not present in the mind of the person who wrote the ad, but that can be plausibly represented as being racially divisive, that will be radioactive, and people will be super careful about it.
John Shin, let me ask you this first, and ask my friend Maria Bartiromo the same question. There are a number of folk in this country, and it's been alluded to earlier in this conversation tonight, maybe not just alluded, maybe even flat out stated, that if between now and the election of 2012, the job picture in this country turns around dramatically. Now, most of us don't think that's going to happen. Dana does, but Ariana, Maria, and I don't.
Dramatically, I wouldn't say,
yeah.
but...
But if it changes significantly or dramatically, that President Barack Obama will win. And people say that because, as Americans, we vote our pocketbooks. We vote our personal interests. So that if the economy turns around, there's some reason to believe that Barack Obama will be re-elected rather easily if he can turn this crisis around, number one. Do you believe that, number one? And number two, is there anything then relative to this meeting again with Hu Jintao this coming week that the president can do in any real way to aid and abet that particular effort?
Okay.
That makes sense?
That's a good question, yeah. Okay. Yeah, first off, listening to this conversation, saying, I now understand the definition of moderate. Now I could claim as one. But that said, yes, if the job turns around dramatically, and any history and any regime had told us that the present administration will continue, and because people need to feel better and they have the appetite to listen and to think about the future, and it'll be easier for you to only talk about the future rather than explaining the past. So that I think favors the incumbent in this case. I agree. So if I were in the administration, what I wanted to do, I talked about earlier when President Hu Jintao comes, the most important thing for the American business does over 50% outside the United States of revenue. American business in general. And this is now the biggest country, the biggest economy, growing the fastest. Nobody's going to debate that. Right? And they need a lot of stuff that we have. Nobody debate that. So, our issue is we don't always think we got invited to all the parties over there. Right? So I'm just making it very simple terms.
Right.
So we need to make sure that we got all the invitations openly. Now, in order to do so, we need to reciprocate. I think we also need to have them invest more money in this country and create more jobs. As I said earlier, they got 100 billion direct investment, but right now it seems policy-wise, attitude-wise, on both sides, is preventing, or the mistrust is preventing that to free flow. Now, I could say this with a lot of evidence that all our allies is getting their fair share plus some more. So I think if I'm President Obama and his administration, first thing I'm going to do is to make sure that we have sound policy to open up the market, we got sound policy to innovate ourselves, and then not to be protectionism. We are doing some level of protectionism. I mean, I was somewhat saddened to see that potentially, or the defense appropriation bill that was signed yesterday, the day before, whatever it was, that we decided that we're going to buy all the solar panels made in the United States. That's not the most helpful thing. I mean, I don't know whose solar panel is better. But the most important thing, we may be buying solar panel from France, for that matter. And it shouldn't be, I think we should let the product and the technology and the pricing and the market wins rather than you dictate who that is.
Maria?
I agree. I think it will be about the economy. If the economy turns, I think it's a shoo-in, frankly. But I do think we are in a slow slog. I think unemployment is persisting because business managers and people who are operating businesses are feeling that they have a lot of expenses coming at them. The cost of health care. They're also unclear about the regulatory environment. They don't know how their businesses will look based on new regulations, and they're worried about new regulations coming at them in the coming year. So that's keeping them somewhat handcuffed in terms of adding new heads to the payroll. And as long as unemployment is an issue, that's going to be an issue for the president. 30% of all mortgages right now are underwater. The housing market has been missing in action in terms of the recovery. So we do need to see policies in place that will encourage businesses to create jobs. The extension of the tax cut plan, frankly, could be a game changer for entrepreneurs, small business managers who maybe see this as a positive to create new jobs. We'll see.
Ariana, from a purely political, partisan point of view, if Maria and John are right, that if the president can turn around the job situation, to use Maria's words, Maria Bartiromo, that it would be a shoo-in for him. Let's assume for the moment that she's right about that. I think she probably is. If she's right about that, then, silly question, what impetus then do Republicans have to work with him at all on improving the economy?
Well, my biggest concern is not that. My biggest concern is that there is absolutely no evidence that this White House is prioritizing jobs. I'm writing a column about what
before you go forward, you're telling me, I want to be clear, that after the midterm elections, you still think the White House doesn't get that jobs.
What's the evidence? There's absolutely no evidence. I mean, if you go back to his last State of the Union, as I did in preparing a column about his new State of the Union, he actually said that jobs is going to be his primary focus. He said that last State of the Union. And it didn't happen.
We haven't seen it.
So that's really, for me, the fundamental problem, that the White House has not woken up to the urgency of the job market. And that's why I was hoping that there would be somebody coming to the White House whose single-minded priority would be the creation of jobs. And when I say that, I mean there are so many tools in the toolbox we have not used, ranging from something small that I'm sure you've been very involved in, the visa process. Right now, we are not letting foreign entrepreneurs come into this country with ideas and money to create jobs because of this reflexive anti-immigration. This is just a small thing. It's not left-right again.
It's more than just jobs.
We need a revolution in priorities. We need vision. If we believed the situation of poor and working people had the same sense of urgency, a same state of emergency as, let's say, the administration right now with the WikiLeaks. You say they zeroed in on the WikiLeaks. They didn't zero in on the torturers. They didn't zero in on the wiretappers, but they zeroed in the WikiLeaks. Okay, they got a right to do that. That's a state of emergency. What if we really believed that poor people's and poor children's situation was a matter of national security the way we do Afghanistan? That's a matter of priority. We need a revolution of priority. Why? Because Americans have such unbelievable imagination, intelligence, and ingenuity. Private sector and public sector would come together and say, the future of American democracy depends on treating poor people and working people with dignity. What would America look like?
I've got to dial back.
Very different place. Very different place.
As I think about it, it's more than just jobs. I don't think a turnaround in the job market is necessarily a shoo-in for the president. It makes it easier, but I think that there are bigger issues. People want to feel the freedom and the independence and the aspiration to move up the economic ladder that they believe America can provide.
Right, but how are they going to do that if they don't have a job?
Right.
I'm sorry. I know I'm being very simplistic, but I have two daughters in college, and so many of their friends are graduating from college and they can't get jobs. Now these are kids who have done all the right things, who've gone to college, who are graduating from college. Honestly, it is really serious out there, and that's the sense that we need to bring to our national conversation.
Maria Teresa Kumar.
Well, and I think, and you mentioned it earlier as well, Chen, is that one of the biggest issues that that President Obama actually has in his back pocket to stimulate the economy right now, today, is comprehensive immigration. And the way you do it is, one, is that you have individuals that are actually with visas that can actually compete on the global scale in technology sectors. But then you also bring people out of the shadows so that employers can exploit them. That they actually raise the level so that it's actually even, right? So that they're actually competing for fair wages. And lastly, these individuals are also individuals that have to pay fines. And they actually have to pay taxes to ensure that they are on their pathway to citizenship. I mean, we also talk about I keep talking about the DREAM Act. The DREAM Act actually allows a pathway to citizenship for individuals that have graduated high school that are either ready to go to college or serve in our military. We're the only country that wants to literally deport valedictorians. That's absurd. These are individuals that want to serve our country. And that also helps us when it comes to the argument that I often hear from the right is, well, there's the issue of national security. We absolutely need to know who's living in our borders. We don't know right now because they're too afraid.
I've got just 1 minute to go. Dr. West, you and I often talk about, just a minute literally before we're off the air here at C-SPAN, you and I talk often, have talked often over the years, that is, about the difference between optimism and hope. And as we try to write this next chapter, even for those who don't have reason to be optimistic, that is to say there isn't something you can see, feel, or touch that gives you reason to believe that things are going to get better, but you are hopeful anyway. And that's what hope is. The Bible says that faith is the evidence of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So that even when people aren't optimistic, they can be hopeful. Why, after all this, can we remain hopeful about our future as a country?
I think because as blues people, if we recognize that he or she who has never wrestled with despair has never lived. It's just a question is not allowing the despair to have the last word, but at least when you wrestle with despair, just like Jacob in the 32nd chapter of Genesis, wrestling with despair in the midnight hour, emerging as Israel, God wrestler with a womb, in touch with reality. I wrestle with despair every day when I look at the prisons, poor people's situation, working people's situation. And I don't hate rich folk. I just know they're doing all right. You see what I mean? I don't give them priority. But that last moment is one of love. Justice is what love looks like in public. When you really love the people, you fight for justice. And in the end, brother, as a Christian, this world's not my home, man. I'm just passing through. I'm just passing through. I'm bearing witness and gone. I'm bearing witness and gone, man.
Since faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen, we close our program every night on PBS for that very reason by saying every night, keep the faith. And before I say keep the faith tonight and wrap this conversation, let me ask you to do three things. Number one, please thank C-SPAN for covering this conversation live around the nation. Let me ask you to thank all these wonderful panelists for being with us tonight. Yay, wonderful. Let me ask you to thank yourselves for being here to be a part of this conversation. And last but not least, if you came in late in this room, this auditorium here at George Washington, by the way, thank George Washington for having us. Thank you. Yeah. If you entered this room late tonight and missed any part of this fascinating and wonderful conversation, next week, January the 18th, 19th, and 20th, over 3 nights, parts of this conversation will repeat on our late night program on PBS, the 18th, 19th, and 20th of January next week. So again, thank you for being here for this conversation. God bless you and have a safe ride home. Good night.
I didn't know this was a campaign.
Can we get these hard bars? I'm the nephew of Mr. San, the boss. Yes, sir. Hold on. Everyone hold on. Tavis audio.
Hello. I want to keep my word now that we're off C-SPAN. I didn't want to get this on the air, but I need to get about the iPad. One last time, thank Nationwide for sponsoring this quiz. And I want to pull the name of the person to win this iPad.
Fascinating bear. I'm still here.